What is up, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the MLB Swing for the Fences show here on the Run Pure Sports YouTube channel, talking today's Wednesday winners. Have an early slate going on right now, but another pretty big slate, 7 games on tap for the main course here on DraftKings, FanDuel, all that good stuff. Here with Mangone, as usual, on a Wednesday, talking, Wednesday afternoon slate. Mangone, I feel like it's been a couple days. How you doing on this Wednesday afternoon?
Yeah, good to be here. We'll talk some MLB. We had some early baseball as well. Not a bad start for me to the day. I got, I got some good teams going, so I don't know if anything will close it out, but we'll have to see. I definitely need the Padres to have a good day against Austin Gomber. Not the best start, but we'll see. And, hey, we got baseball. We got NBA tonight, which I think it's the last 2 game slate. I know the guys are live talking about that. They're probably almost done. Who knows, though? They're like 2 hours in. If they want to go 4 hours, I'm sure they will. And then we got PGA, right? PGA tonight to finish up the lineups with. And it's a championship, right? It's a major, so we get all the good golfers together. So it should be a pretty fun sports weekend. I'm definitely excited. And also, I'm excited to be here with you after your Timberwolves are the champions rant. It's not looking good for old DC anymore.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say is I did stop betting on them after game 3. The one game was enough for me to be like, oh, man, I got that one way wrong. Got to live with the Twitter L's. Yeah, but you know what? I got, a few extra bucks in my account betting on the Wolves overall. I did bet. I haven't admitted this yet to anybody. I did bet on the Nuggets last night.
Very good, DC.
Yeah.
You bet on for the upcoming game or for that game?
No, last night I did.
Okay.
I didn't bet enough that I was still rooting for the Wolves. I got some futures, and they're my favorite team, just kind of outside of betting. But I couldn't believe the Nuggets were only 4-point favorites in that game. I mean, after watching those 2 games in Minnesota, I don't know. I've just seen the story enough time with the Wolves. I think the Nuggets. I think they close it out in Game 6 in Minnesota. You consider the Nuggets at a plus 150 dog in that game, which seems crazy to me. Good season for the Wolves. Listen, I think you're an app, man. I think a lot of good years ahead for Edwards and the Wolves. But, man, Rudy Gobert, I feel like all the tweets that I sent just berating that trade kind of I don't know, got off that take this year when they played so well with the number 1 defense. But he has been, utterly worthless in the playoffs. Jokic just absolutely owned him last night. And, even looking back, man, going, the game the Timberwolves had their best game of their franchise history, I was lucky enough to be at it. I said it at the time in Denver, Game 3. That was the game Gobert missed, right? When he had his baby, and the Wolves just locked him down. And I don't think that's a huge coincidence. So will be interesting to see what the Wolves do. They obviously cannot have anything close to the same game plan they had in Game 5 and Game 6, but I do think the Nuggets are going to close this series out. And you know what? Was cheering for the Wolves hard, but I'll be on the Nuggets bandwagon again after they dismiss the Wolves here. So, what about you? You're here in the Denver area. Honestly, the Nuggets enthusiasm is not what it should be for a championship team with a 3-time MVP. Would you agree with that take?
Yeah, I guess overall, but I do have a lot of friends that are big Nuggets fans, and they don't come and watch all the games with me, but the Nuggets are on. They're always oh, can I come over and watch the game? I'm yeah, come on over. We watch all the games over here. So I was surprised, obviously, with what happened with the Nuggets in the first 2 games, but that's why I kept saying, don't worry, it's not going to last long, and that's because my take the whole time has been the Timberwolves rushed their championship run. They rushed it by doing the Gobert thing. That's what I always thought. And you can't have $100+ million on the bench. You just won't win a title, and that's what they're going to have to do. So I hope in the offseason, and I don't think they'll do it. I think they need another year of L's to figure it out. I think they should trade one of Cat or Gobert. It would likely, I think, have to be Cat because I think it's just harder to move that Rudy deal. But if they could, I think it'd be great. and then I would do that. So, but Alex just said, I'm from Jersey. I know more about the Knicks and Sixers fans. I'm a Celtics guy, actually. I liked Paul Pierce as a kid. I loved watching Paul Pierce, Tony Battie, and Antoine Walker. That was my favorite trio, so that's why I gravitated towards them, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, I don't want to go crazy with the takes because I've been all over the place. So it's like, you don't want to completely change your take after like two more games.
Yeah.
But I do think, if Ant wins a championship in Minnesota, I think it'll be without both Cat and Gobert off the team. I bet it'll be a couple years from now.
I agree.
Yeah. Michael King getting his ass rocked by the Rockies. This Michael King guy, man, he's all over the place. He had 11 strikeouts and just dominated the Dodgers. Then he can't get through the Rockies at home. I really don't know what's going on there.
One thing, DC, to talk about, and this leads into baseball a little bit. I know the people that love baseball are not happy about this. So Michael King, this is a great example of a guy that, like, dude, when he is chalk, he's probably not as good of a play compared to when he's not chalk, right? Like, we'll see him some slates under 10%. We'll see him some slates, but he's going to be like 50%. Like, that's just something I've been thinking about with him. And, man, I let it slide because it was the Rockies today, but this solidifies it for me for sure.
I think that's a fair point for Michael King. And I know most people probably disagree with this take. Maybe you included, man, going, like, the production at pitcher, in my opinion, doesn't correlate that well to the ownership. I mean, I've been talking about this all year, and I've had a mediocre year so far. I just haven't gotten to the top of any big tournaments yet. So it's, when you're a GPP player, you got to get to the very top once or twice to really get into the profits. But man. We're seeing time and time again, like the most popular pitchers on the slate not getting the job done. People continue to jam them in. And oftentimes, I try to make this point on the show and in my article, you can find similar pivots at or near the price point for 30% versus 7% owned, stuff like that at all over the price ranges, which I do think in general is a pretty good way to go. But let's get into these games. We do have 7 games to talk about, so let's jump right in. Tampa Bay and Boston, the first game on this slate. Maybe slight weather concerns here. I think it should be fine, but at least, do pay it some mind before lineups do lock a couple of hours from now. Tanner Houck pitching for the Boston Red Sox. He's been awesome this year. I personally think this pitching slate is pretty tough. So Houck, in Fenway, wind blowing out, it's not a great pitching environment. On most slates, maybe he wouldn't have made my list, but he does today. He's been awesome against righties. This is they do have more lefties in there than usual, but not the most intimidating crew. A lot of strikeouts to be had here. Houck is not my SP1 today in terms of fantasy production, but not far behind. I do like him quite a bit at 9,100. And then from the Tampa side, we saw Taj Bradley make his first start of the year against the Yankees 5 days ago. He was really good in that one. Kind of a top prospect coming up. So I do think there's some potential here for Taj Bradley. I'm not sure I want to play it in his second start of the season in Fenway Park. But yeah, I think you could make a case for really either pitcher or all 4 offenses here, I think, in this game. Throw it over to you, man, going Houck, Bradley, Red Sox, and Rays.
Yeah, Tanner Houck definitely has like a soft spot for me. If you remember, my guy Workbench Pete, he shipped with him, right? That was the day that Houck had a huge game, and I did pretty good myself that day. A lot of members did. I had him. I basically wrote on the After Hours playbook. The reasoning was simple. I was like, he's just gonna be like lower owned because he was going against the Guardians on that slate, and like no one ever wants to attack him. It's like the guy's got insane upside. So why are we not targeting him, right? I've made it a point on a lot of these slates to just look at pitchers and be like, if this guy has a 10+ strikeout ceiling, I'm crazy if I don't consider rostering him or playing him. And even if he's going to be like 10% owned, I think you just have to consider it because the ceiling is just too good. I'm also in agreement with you. It's like, I don't think pitching is the way to really separate that much on many slates. And like, if my pitcher gets 20 and he's chalk, but my other pitcher gets 10, it's just not that big of a deal. Like, it just isn't. Sure, it adds up at some point, but we're trying to ship GBPs. We're not trying to just min cash. Like,
I mean, it's like one RBI double in a run. You know, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, it's not a huge deal, right? So I think you have to like Tanner Houck here. I assume his ownership is kind of low on this slate, DC. Like, it doesn't seem like it. I'm pulling it up now just to triple check. Yeah, I'm seeing him at 10% on Saber. And I know obviously we can give him time to make adjustments and stuff, but this isn't a guy that's going to be chalky. He's going to be low owned. And Steve has in the chat that Captain's projection on Houck is way higher than the industry. And I love that too. I know Captain's had some good stuff on that. And I just think the upside for Houck is too good to ignore. This Rays team is not that great either. I'm not scared of them at all. Sure, I think this ballpark, yes, it's a great ballpark upgrade. We're all going to agree on that. It's a good ballpark upgrade. Wind blowing out 66, but I don't know. It's not like 80 degrees and wind blowing out 15, right? I don't want to overreact too much to it. I think, yes, it's all positives, but I just think the upside is too good to pass up. So I'm going to be very high on Tanner Houck today. I just think he's worth taking a shot on. Also, a way to kind of dictate ownership. You look at Pablo Lopez and Fernando Valdez, and I just think more people are going to gravitate towards those guys. It's just like Houck is clearly sandwiched in the middle, where it's just clearly a spot where he just doesn't have as much ownership. So I'm absolutely going to love him. Taj Bradley has been pretty good. I know the Red Sox, it actually was only one game. So the Red Sox struggle more against lefties. I typically like to take lefties against the Red Sox, not as much righties. I think Bradley's fine at 8K, but again, not someone I'm, slamming on this slate or anything like that. I think he's a fine play, but kind of someone I'm just going to be more even with the field on, I guess.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. We're on the same page for the most part on this game. I'll ask you this, though. Why is it, Mangone, that, if you look at the Discord or chat or Twitter or wherever you want to go, a pitcher scoring 8 versus 18, people will lose their minds if a pitcher gets them 8 points versus 18 points. If a hitter gets them 5 versus 15, which is the exact same difference, hitter and pitcher points count the exact same. Nobody would say a damn thing. Is it just because they're the first two spots in the lineup? Like, I don't understand why the emphasis is so much on pitching when actually the smaller bands of fantasy points scored are at the pitching position. It's like I think it's parallel to quarterbacks, right? We want to pay down at quarterback when we can because every quarterback gets the same opportunity. I think the same thing is kind of true for pitchers. The pitchers get 90 to 100 pitches to prove their worth, but they have a smaller band of scoring than the hitters do. The same thing as wide receivers do in the NFL, but that's not the reaction that people have to their lineups. Any take on that? Because I think it's a mistake that people are making in general, worrying so much about pitching when every point scored in your lineup counts the exact same no matter what position it comes from.
Now, listen, I love that point. I think it's a really good point that you brought up there. So what I like to do, and every slate's different, but it always depends who the expensive pitchers are versus who the cheap pitchers are and who's getting the ownership. But the thing I like to look at with pitching a lot of the time is, for instance, if Chris Sale's on the mound, it's a harder fade than some of these other guys that are gaining ownership. And I want to flip the build when I know there's fragility in the top end guys or the low end guys that are getting the ownership. Or I might look at the offenses. This afternoon's a great example. If you look at a lot of the offenses that were gaining ownership, there's a lot of the cheap, crappy offenses besides the Brewers. I was just like, why are the Tigers getting some ownership? Or some of these other weird offenses that I didn't make sense because everyone wanted to pay for Crochet and King. So I wanted to flip the build. I remember I was like, let me find one team that's super unique and different. And that wasn't just spend on the Padres build. At least that's what it felt like on the slate. And that's just what I look for. I like to run projections, see what they all do, and then try to find a unique team amongst the projections that's just a complete build flip in baseball. That's what I like to do with my pitching, as long as I feel okay about it. And listen, I like to use the course sometimes and see it. I looked and I was like, yeah, everyone likes King and Crochet. I get it. I like them too. But there might be some other unique builds. Don't sleep on Brian Wu. Don't sleep on Alec Marsh, who I think were really good plays. And I even found a team that was interesting that went both of those guys. And I thought the under was good in that game. I don't even know what it's doing right now or if it's even started. But the point I'm getting at is these are the things I like to do with the pitchers. And that's why I talked about the Tanner Houck idea of just people are not going to go to him. So that's just a really nice pivot. And if you get the game, DC, where that chalk pitcher like Michael King right now goes for negative, it's just a humongous boost because it buries so many teams. Like, think about it like from a showdown perspective. If, like, let's say Giannis, let's say he's 80% owned and he only gets 40 DK points and they get blown out. Well, all those teams aren't winning. Those 80% of teams are just done. They can't win. It's over. So that's definitely something that I always like to look at. And I think it's a really smart thing that I should be looking a little bit more at in baseball than I have been.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. And honestly, I just think it's the pitchers of the two first positions listed on your lineup. It's how most people start the lineups. I think it's always been that way. Honestly, probably always be that way. But
Yes.
I think it's a mistake to overemphasize trying to get the pitching right when we've seen many times chalk, expensive pitching fail dramatically. Same thing it has with Michael King today. Listen, I have Michael King. I'm not saying people that played him were stupid or something, but it's just there's a lot of variance still at the pitcher position. It's not the slam dunk that people kind of treat it like it or they want it to be or it should be, whatever it is. So, all right. That's a lot of time on the first game and some game theory. So let's move on to Chicago Cubs, Atlanta Braves. Braves pretty big favorites in this one, sitting at minus 175. Charlie Morton on the hill for the Braves, getting up there, long of tooth, Mr. Morton, but performing well this season. Looks, frankly, a little even better than he has the last couple. Gets a Cubs team that started off the year pretty hot. It's cooled off to some degree. They do have a healthier lineup with Bellinger and Suzuki back in there, but I don't mind Morton here on this slate at 8,400. I think he's firmly in play. Javier Assad, pitching for the Cubs, has had good results. I mean, if you just look at, win-loss, ERA, whip, game log, that type of thing, Assad looks good. I don't really buy it with Javier Assad. And this Braves team, they will be without Ronald Acuna, who I think is getting his first day off of the entire year, now that he's done all that much anyway. Michael Harris will move to the leadoff spot. He hit a home run yesterday. And then Matt Olson, who I do think has found a little something. It's been a bit of a struggle for the Braves at the beginning of the year. It's not going to last for long. And I do think this team is about to bust out perhaps tonight against Javier Assad, who I don't trust at all. I'll also say this, Mangone. I know not everybody watches as much baseball as I do, but even the Braves announcers who are generally have a really good idea what's going on, they've been talking all season, just the ball's been dying at Truist Park, wind blowing in on most slates, a lot of home runs that look like home runs that, ended up a couple feet short. This is, I think, the first game where we got some decent winds blowing out to center field. Hot, or relatively hot, humid. I think the ball's going to be flying in Atlanta, and I think the Braves put up a big number, even without Ronald Acuna, who, frankly, hasn't really been doing much anyway, so it's not a huge loss to the lineup. I'm in on the Braves. Some interest in Morton. No Assad for me. What about you, Mangone, Braves and Cubs?
Yeah, let me just address something really quick with that Tanner Houck over on strikeouts. The one thing I'd say, X Beast, is one reason why we like Houck a lot here more is it's just an ownership game, right? There's a pitcher that's 10% versus pitchers that are like 20, 30, 40%, where that's the reason we like Houck. Could he get the over on strikeouts? Yeah, sure. But that's the reason for it. It's not necessarily I like him because of his metric. It's just a math game with the ownership percentages. But let's go to another guy that I think is going to have ownership. It's Charlie Morton. I think he's definitely someone that we need to discuss. A really good pitching option here on this slate. I do think he might gain more ownership than a Pablo Lopez because it does look like, and I'm not trying to skip games, but it does look like that Minnesota game has some weather in it. And if the weather gets a little dicey and everyone just sees they're playing the
Yankees.
Yankees.
Minnesota?
Yeah, that Minnesota game, there's like weather there. Did you notice that?
I hadn't really. Go ahead. I'll look it up, but I hadn't really been on that. No.
Well, look into it, because the point I'm getting at with it, and it just, all these top end pitchers matter, and the top end pitchers are Lopez, Valdez, and Morton. And the more I think about it and look at, like, how he's projecting right now, I think you're going to see Morton like be very high owned, even going up against the Cubs here, right? I just think people are going to want to gravitate towards him. He's been really good. It's just a pretty nice spot. The total is kind of low, but the wind is blowing out. So the question is, do we take a chance on these Cubs as a leverage play, DC? Do we take that chance? Is it worth it based on what the ownership we're seeing on Morton is? Or do we just eat the Morton chalk? I think it's a really good talking point, especially with how you just said the ball's been dying in that ballpark. But right now the wind is blowing out. It's just a little bit of a different situation than we've seen throughout the year. Would you agree?
100% agree. I think it's the best hitting situation the Rays have had the entire season so far. Listen, we're a quarter of the way through the season. I think this is the best hitting weather the Rays have had in Truist Park of the entire year. And I know Morton has been good. I still think, just having watched this guy, I watched frankly almost every Braves game, so I've seen all of his starts over the last 2 or 3 years. He is absolutely capable of blowing up against anybody. And, this Cubs lineup is not that bad. I don't necessarily want to go to the 6 through 9 hitters, but Tauchman, Suzuki, Bellinger, Morel, Bush, I think could do some damage there. So that makes sense. Looking at weather quickly, I think the Twins game is going to be fine, honestly.
No, not the Cubs, the Minnesota game.
What's that?
The Minnesota game, not the Cubs game.
Yeah, Twins game. That's what I said. Twins game, I think, will be good. Yeah. I mean, obviously you need to monitor over the next, that's still a long ways away, 2 hours and 40 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes. But I do think that game will be fine. I would anticipate playing it, assuming the weather will be all right. So, yeah, I get stacking against Morton. I do think if I stacked against him, Mangone, probably the full 5, man. I think I would just go with the 1 through 5, hope that he's walking people. You can steal a little bit against him. He does allow some power at times, so that makes sense. And then, the Braves, I do think
we should talk about the Braves a little bit. So the one thing I want to mention is they have Zach Short in the lineup at 2,100, which I'm not saying you should play him. I'm just saying he helps make a lot work with your lineups. Like, he is going to be someone that I think if you're playing Brave stacks, you kind of need, right? Because if you want to play all these expensive bats, he's going to be kind of beneficial towards it. Him or like an Arcia, that could be part of it too. But I think that's a pretty good talking point. Typically with the Braves, they don't have values to help get guys into your lineups, but now they do with Kelenic at the bottom and Zach Short, and even Arcia and Duvall. They have value plays that help make it easier to roster. So I think that's just an interesting point to bring up with going up against Assad.
Yeah, good point there. I'll bring up another point. No left-handers in the bullpen for the Cubs. It will be right-handers for the entirety of this game, unless I'm missing something, which I'm probably not. So Michael Harris, Matt Olson, Jared Kelenic will all have the platoon advantage, especially big for Kelenic, who does come out of the game usually if a lefty comes in from the pen. I don't think that will be an issue today. So I'm especially in on these Braves lefties, but in on the Braves in general. Let's keep it moving. New York and Minnesota up next. Mango mentioned potential weather here. I did pull up the radar. I do see, if advising baseball games was your lone role in the fantasy industry, why you would have to express some caution in this game. But as someone whose role also involves other things other than Googling the weather, I will proceed as if this game will play just fine. I think there's about 90 to 95% chance this game doesn't have a delay at all. Higher than that it plays. So, yeah, New York, Minnesota, let's play this one. If we need to adjust 2.5 hours from now, we will do so. Pablo Lopez pitching for the Minnesota Twins. Maybe hasn't been quite as sharp this season as he was last year, but he's still been awesome. He's still the same guy to me. Talked about that a lot. I do think he is the SP1 on this slate, which I don't know, maybe is a hot take. I know this Yankees team has been awesome, or at least, power-wise. I still like this matchup for Lopez, though, at home. There are strikeouts to be had, and Lopez, I don't know, for people that aren't that into baseball, he is a kind of a wizard of pitching. I don't know if that's the right term, but I do think he will know the holes that exist in this Yankees lineup, not just batter to batter, but swing to swing. And I think Lopez will have the pitches necessary to get out Aaron Judge and Stanton and make them look if you just pull up one at bat of these guys, they can look like the best hitter in the world or the worst one, right? Specifically in the case of Stanton, where he'll swing at a slider 2 feet outside the zone, and then he'll hit a 500-foot bomb the next at bat. But I think Lopez will be able to navigate this lineup. He is my SP1 if we're talking just raw projection. He will be, looks like close to the highest zone, maybe up there with, looks like at least Saber has a close race between Lopez, Morton, Valdez as the top three. Pablo is my guy, Mangone. And then I don't mind the twin side of this one against Marcus Stroman, but I typically just avoid both sides of that matchup. No Stroman for me. I'll have limited amount of twins. What about you, Travis? Twins and Yankees.
Yeah, I was yawning there because I got bored of this game because I don't want to talk about the Twins. You know me, I hate the Twins. I hate rostering them. To be fair, it's probably not the worst day to roster Twins. I just think there's better offenses that I want to target. I do think you're going to get them lower owned against Stroman. I know Stroman can have his problems at times, but I think I'm going to be off the Twins. And I mean, the only reason I would play the Yankees is more for the leverage, I would say. And one thing I do want to note, we don't talk BVP too much on these shows, but there is a BVP guy out there on this team. It's Juan Soto. Juan Soto is 10 for 27 with 3 home runs against old Pablo Lopez. And listen, we talked about this a lot, DC. We talked about how spending up for just elite bats like Ellie De La Cruz, like Shohei Ohtani, when they're just in spots where no one wants to roster them. Why couldn't Juan Soto hit 2 home runs today? Sure, it's not the best ballpark for a lefty, right? Because I think it's in Minnesota. That's a better park for the right-handers. But I just think Juan Soto as a one-off is someone that I want to be overweight on for sure. Again, we talk about this a lot. Yeah, I'm going to want to play Yordan Alvarez and all these other good expensive guys, but I want to make sure I get some Juan Soto in there. And I don't mind the Yankees stack, but if you do it, you don't need 50, 40%. It's just a slight leverage play. If you get a couple stacks, it's not the end of the world. It's kind of like looking at Michael King on this slate and playing the Rockies. That's kind of the reasoning. And, one reason I didn't want to do the Rockies is, one, they were away from Coors. And 2, it's the Rockies. At least the Yankees are an elite offense, right? And when they hit the ball, they hit it far when they're dialed in. So, and they've been pretty dialed this year. So I just think the Yankees as a leverage play is going to be one that I definitely am going to try to get overweight on. When I run my teams, when I get off the show to finalize everything, I'm going to make sure I have at least one Yankee stack in there for sure.
Makes sense to me. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Yankees do some damage. But Lopez is a guy I like to bet on. He will be in my cores tonight and on my main lineups, at least 2 of the 4. I play in 4 main lineups most days. And I'm in on the Lopez train. I do think he is, in my opinion, the best pitcher play on this slate.
Is he better than Morton and Valdez, DC? I think those are the 3 that most people are going to gravitate towards.
I think so. I'm not on Valdez. We'll get to that game here after we get through Texas and Cleveland. And I trust Lopez way more than I do Charlie Morton. I agree Morton's matchup is better, but I have just a high degree of trust in Pablo Lopez in general. So that's the route that I'll be going with the expensive chalk pitchers who, ownership-wise, it looks like it's going to be a toss-up between those 3. So you can kind of take your pick. For me, it is Lopez over the other 2. Let's get to Cleveland and Texas up next. Texas sitting around minus 179 total. John Gray versus Carlos Carrasco. Gray has been awesome this season. Pretty much every outing, including last time out in Colorado, 7 strikeouts, getting the job done. I've played him a ton, Mangone. I think I'm off John Gray on this slate, though. I just don't love picking on this Guardians team, especially with right-handed pitchers. I don't think Gray's a terrible play at 7,500, but I am looking elsewhere myself. And then Carlos Carrasco, I know he's had 2 solid outings in a row against the White Sox and the Angels. I mean, let's be honest, that's 2 of the very best matchups you can possibly get. The start before those 2 put up -6, 8 earned runs against Houston. I'm expecting more of that kind of -8 performance. And I love Texas today. I think Texas wins this game. John Gray, I think, pitches fine, but I don't think he's putting up a big score against this Guardians team. It's just tough to do so with the way they can put the ball in play. So give me Texas offense is mostly what I'm looking at in this one. What about you, Mango?
Yeah. So for one, Carrasco is the type of pitcher that, like, if he goes up against the White Sox, like, it's clearly a spot where he can walk a couple of guys and then he can get through those innings, right? Because when he gets to, like, some of those dead guys in the lineup, he just gets the strikeouts and gets out of the innings and gets lucky. Good luck getting lucky against this Texas Rangers offense. I definitely want to buy on these Rangers right now. I just think this is like the type of matchup where you see Carrasco just absolutely implode. Another thing that's nice too is Carrasco, because he has so many walk issues, these are the times where, like, randomly in the second or third inning, he just get yanked because he's having such terrible control issues that it just gets out of hand. And then we basically get like a bullpen type of game from just like the bad bullpen guys just throwing meatballs across the plate. So I just think there's so much upside here for Texas that I have to be, pretty highly exposed to them. They'll be an offense I want to get a ton of exposure to today. When it comes to them, though, they have Nathaniel Lowe, who I like in that 3-hole, who's like, he's 4-3 now, but he still feels kind of cheap. I feel like that price is going to continue to go up throughout the year. So I'll like him in the 1-4 with Semien, Seager, Garcia. And they have value throughout their lineup, right? Between Jankowski, Durant, Tavares. I know Tavares has been pretty bad, so I'd probably lean going like some of the other options instead. But overall, Texas is one of the top stacks for me on this slate. And I think you brought up some pretty good points with John Gray. And, I kind of talked about how Tanner Houck smoked Cleveland that other time. And we've also talked about how we want to try to look for ways to get off some of these top-end pitchers. There's no better way to do it than John Gray, I think, especially with me liking this Texas Rangers offense who have expensive bats. I like another offense that we're going to get to that has some expensive bats that I want to get in there. And with a lot of people spending up at their pitcher, I might look to spend down. And I think I want to spend down at 7,500 with John Gray. It just seems like a really strong spot to chase some of the ceiling that he has here.
Makes sense. I'm not going with John Gray, but I totally understand why. I'm a believer of his in general. It's just the matchup I don't love. But let's get to the next game on the slate, Oakland and Houston. 3 more games to talk about. This one, total sitting at 8.5. Framber Valdez against Aaron Brooks. We kind of know what to expect from Valdez at this point. I actually don't think he's quite as sharp as he's been in the past. I get why people are playing him. And I actually think he'll come in, just my guess here, as the highest owned pitcher on this slate. He is the biggest favorite by far. And Oakland does have the lowest team total against. And listen, people still love playing pitchers against Oakland. I understand why, but the numbers don't necessarily bear it out. They've actually been kind of an average offense on the season. Valdez is more of a ground ball guy than a strikeout guy. Any fan of his would tell you that. Doesn't have more than 6 strikeouts in any start of his 5 this season. So it's a fade of Valdez for me. Not that I'm expecting him to get blown up necessarily. I'm not stacking Oakland by any means. Valdez just gets too many ground balls. But I'm not sure the strikeouts are going to be there as much as people would want for Valdez. And honestly, when you can't get the strikeouts or the strikeouts are unlikely to come, you give up like 1 2-run home run, and all of a sudden it gets really hard to put up a decent score. So I'm kind of off of Valdez here. Again, like I said, I understand why people are playing him. I'm just going a different direction. Definitely prefer Pablo Lopez. Also prefer Charlie Morton. So not for me on Valdez. And then Aaron Brooks. People might assume he's a prospect coming up. Not really. He's 34 years old, has been all over baseball, professional baseball, playing at, it's like a point guard coming over from the EuroLeague at 34 years old, starting in the NBA. Probably not going to go that well for Mr. Aaron Brooks. So Houston let us down last night, but I'm back on board here. Love Houston offense. These pitchers pretty low on. Over to you, Mangone. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries. So Framber Valdez, one reason I know DC doesn't like him. I'm with Steve, who in the chat, Steve says he likes Houck over Framber, and I agree. I want to be more under on Framber, Pablo, and Morton today than I think the field. I'll still have some, but I want to be more under, and I want to take chances on some of these other pitchers that just aren't going to be as owned and that can help flip the build. And one way to flip the build, and I understand a lot of people are playing Houston today, but I'm going to jam Houston. I think I'm going to jam these studs. Like, I'm going to make sure I get a lot of these good bats in here. I want to have Alex Bregman, who's on an absolute heater. I want Jordan. I want Kyle Tucker. I mean, one thing I'll say with the Texas Rangers, or not the Texas Rangers, the Houston Astros, is if you use an optimizer, which I think a lot of people here do, and you're not building by hand, or even if you are building by hand, it gets difficult. But when you plug in Jordan and Kyle Tucker with by hand, well, you get them in your lineups, right? One thing to do sometimes that I like to do is I like to run teams, and I have a set of 50 right here. I'm just going to pull up the 6 Astro stacks I got, and what do you know? None of them have Kyle Tucker and Jordan Alvarez together. If you are MMEing, let's say you're playing the 20 max tonight, there's a very good chance that your teams do not, you have like 5 Astro stacks and Jordan hits a homer and Kyle Tucker goes off, and there's a really good chance you don't have them on the same team together. And that's something that I've done a pretty good job of being very conscious of when I'm building my lineups is, how do I get both these guys? Like when I play the Yankees, how do I get Judge and Soto, depending on the situation? I know there's been spots where I've been like, well, Verdugo's on a heater, so I'll keep riding out Verdugo, and the price is just too good. But like, I just think it's something we have to highly consider. I think this Joey Loperfido guy is good. I'll have exposure to him too. But the point I'm getting at is you need to be conscious if you want to have them both together. And that's something I am going to do when I construct my lineups. Sometimes I'll lock both Jordan and Kyle Tucker. I'll just see, what is it doing with my lineups? Maybe it's building bad teams and I just don't like them and they all just suck. And then I'm like, well, there's a reason why. So now I won't play that and I don't think it's good. That's just definitely something that I think is super important, especially when you want to do what I want to do tonight. And I really want to flip the build a little bit and get these studs in here. So I want to get them. I want Alex Bregman. I mean, the dude's on an absolute heater right now. So I want to make sure I have exposure to him. Like I said, I'm definitely down to get Loperfido on my lineups. Let's see. I don't know much about Trey Cabbage. Is he any good, DC? I mean, they're going against Aaron.
Loperfido's the guy you want there. I mean,
okay. Well, another thing too, I think people overlook a little bit too at times is like, I know nothing about Trey Cabbage, but the dude will probably have no ownership within the stack. And honestly, he's going against Aaron Brooks, and Aaron Brooks sucks. And we might have some bullpen guys. Like, these are the lineups that when we expect there to be 10 plus runs, you want to have some uniqueness in there. So I want the big boys, right? I want Kyle Tucker. I want Jordan. I want Bregman. I want these guys in Altuve, but I want to mix and match these guys for sure. So make sure to get exposures through 1 through 9. Don't X any of them off. And Foster asks who Loperfield is. That dude is obviously really good. It seems like he's a prospect, DC. Is that correct?
Yeah, he can match for sure. He's got power. We oftentimes see these prospects come up. It's tough for them to like get to their power, but Loperfido definitely has it. If he gets into one, it will be going out of the park. So I do like him at 2,600. Boynton here.
Can we talk about what Boynton said about the Framber stuff? I don't know about the splits, but can you talk about how he has a long leash tonight, possibly with the bullpen usage? I think it's a conversation going on in the chat right now, and I think it's good to discuss that. Like, there are times, DC, where we know the bullpen is taxed and we know a guy might have to go deeper, and we do not know the outcome of this slate. We have no idea what's going to happen, but what we do know is he has a really good chance at going deeper, and there's some value in that for sure.
For sure. I think that is, just being honest, a little bit overrated. I mean, Framber's going to get his like 90 to 100 pitches pretty much regardless. It's not like, oh, our bullpen's taxed, you're going to throw 130 pitches and go the whole game. That's not really a thing. It's not like the NBA, right, where you get a scrub point guard in there when everyone's hurt and they got to play 42 minutes and they're just some walk. So I don't think it's anything close to that for baseball, but worth noting. And I actually think it's worth noting more for the if you really want to get contrarian, this A's stack who has, pardon my French, they fucked up more than a few chalk starting pitchers on this young season, and they're going to get bad pitchers out of the Astros pen. If I don't know, 10 to 20% chance that they can knock Framber out in 5 innings. Could be looking good for the A's. So that's honestly my take on it. The same fact of the Astros bullpen is gas could lead you to Framber or to the A's stack, right? Like, I think both takes are reasonable. That's why we love MLB DFS.
That's a really good point. And I was going to mention the A's a little bit just because I think they're really good as mini stacks. And I feel like they're always pretty good as mini stacks just because, one, they're typically really cheap. If you look up and down the lineup, Toro, Rooker, Davis, Shea, Langeliers, they're all like below 4K. Typically, I know a couple guys are above it, but as one-offs and just in mini stacks, it's really strong. And another thing to notice for the lineup, like Zach Eloff is hitting in the 5 hole, Nevin in the 6 hole, Ruiz now in the 9 hole. The point with that is that lineup's getting better, right? And it's like they're hitting the ball really well. And I want to ride this out till they make those trades. I know the team's going to probably be pretty bad when it comes to August and September, unless they have guys being called up that I'm not expecting. But, man, I really think this A's team as a mini stack is good because we know Valdez can get a little wild. So I like the call there. I think it's really good. And I think we can't ignore Oakland right now and what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you run a GPP. So, yeah, might get in an Oakland stack there myself. Let's get to the final 2 games of this slate. First one we'll talk about St. Louis and the LA Angels. Griffin Canning, Lance Lynn on the mound. I'm kind of I have been, frankly, for a couple of years on a little bit of an anti-Lance Lynn crusade, Mangone. So I'm not playing him here. I do think Lance Lynn, I'm seeing him 3rd highest owned. Saber has 4th highest owned. They've got it Framber, Morton, Pablo, Griffin Canning, Lance Lynn. I definitely prefer the Griffin Canning side of this one. Played him last week too. Put up 16 fantasy points. But at 5,600, he was like 3 or 4% owned on that slate. He certainly came through. Kind of bring it back to the pitching versus hitting rant I had earlier. I think Canning is one of the better plays on this slate. Now, it does seem like on this, today, this slate, people are onto that a little bit. Canning projecting around 20 to 25% ownership. But against the St. Louis team, man, I honestly think he's worse than a league average starting pitcher, but not that much worse, and probably a number 4 overall. Canning at 5,500, I just, my style of play, I got to have him in there. Get the big bats. He's going to throw, 4, 5, 6 innings, almost certainly. Against St. Louis, it's probably enough to get you 10 to 20 fantasy points. Not expecting a gem, but I do like Griffin Canning. I get why people are playing Lance Lynn. I just not going to do it myself. Would much rather play the Angels bats. What about you, Mangone? Where do you stand between the St. Louis Cardinals and the LA Angels?
Yeah, just let me touch on one thing from the Discord chat from Trevor. He uses Saber a lot, and it just, gives our guy Saber a little shout out real quick. And DC, chime in if you have a good take on it, because I know you use Saber some all the time. When it comes to getting your exposure to teams, like let's say you want exposure to Oakland today. Typically, I use the Sims, and because I use the Sims, it runs 5,000 different simulations and teams. And because it does that, What I then decide to do is afterwards, I set the min setting in and it should push them in. Or another thing I'll do is if it's a cores day and I'm getting like 60% cores and I don't want that much, I might set a max of 20% on them. But I always do it after I run my teams. And if I'm not getting as much after I run them, then maybe I'll rerun it. But before I do the rerun, I'll up some of the projections of the plays. And then I'll see. And I try to figure out why is it doing that and why is it not. DC, do you have any reasons or how you handle using SaberSim with the mins and maxes?
The way I use it is I go through the pictures first and I look at, just decide on my own, after looking at ownership projections, my projections on the pitchers, how much of each pitcher I want. And I set a narrow band, right? So for Griffin Canning today, I see he's projected to be around 20% owned. I want him in my lineups maybe between 35 to 45% owned, right? So somewhere around double the field, but leaving a bandwidth in there. And then I kind of do that for all my pitchers where I get them dialed in to where I want them to be, run the lineups, see what it gives me for hitters in terms of stacks, 5-man, 4-man, 3-man, 2-man, overall hitters. And then I kind of adjust from there, rerun. And maybe I'm missing something, but I assume you're the same way where you got to rerun it multiple times, tweaking things to kind of get what you ultimately want. And then oftentimes you still don't get what you ultimately want at the end, but you just got to roll with the best you can get.
Well, if you get too far down in the weeds and you can't figure out like you're like, I made all these adjustments, why isn't it happening? Sometimes there's other reasons. Like last night, I ran stuff and I had 2 teams on FanDuel that were stuck with Mike Conley. And I was like, why am I stuck with Mike Conley? He's at a 0. Well, I looked and it's because I had a min projection or a min salary of 49 or 59,700. And because I had that, it wasn't forcing in other teams because the math couldn't figure it out. So sometimes it's a math issue among other settings. And you just have to make sure that you're not doing something that's constricting the optimizer too much. You want to get your own mix in there, but you can't put too much into it. You have to find that happy medium, and that takes time. And as you keep going on, you make mistakes and you kind of live and learn. So that's kind of how I would handle it. But I do want to talk about Griffin Canning because this is a really
real quick on the optimizer. We've given this advice before, but if you ever, you're in the last hour before lock and you run a set of lineups that looks pretty good, but not perfect, upload those lineups into your settings because it does happen sometimes where things go haywire, right? You can't quite figure out why it won't run the lineups that you want it to, and your lineups get worse and worse, and it's like a downward spiral, right? So if you do get like a decent set, you can always change them, right? It takes what? I don't know, less than a minute to change, if you're quick. But if you do get like a decent set, just get those in there, and then you're not as stressed about it, right? As opposed to like I see some people like, the Saber or whatever optimizer they're using broke 3 minutes before lock, and now I'm stuck with 50 dead players. Like, okay, that was on you for not having a reasonable set in there when you could have got one. I think you agree with that.
Yes, I agree. One thing I'll say too is it depends how many teams you're doing. Like if you're doing 150, it's a lot harder to do what I'm about to say. But like, for instance, I've been playing between 10 and 20 on NBA lately. And like, I'll typically upload something and I'll upload it like 10 minutes before. And like, if I make adjustments and I can't get it perfect in the last 5 minutes, I'll just be like, oh, I only have, 20% Isaiah Hartenstein. That's wrong. I want more of him. So I'm just going to move him now manually and change a couple players that I don't like.
You go over flop to the cheapest player and then you leave yourself open and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff that you can do. Not everyone here is doing 150. Some people are only doing 20 and they're running the 20 max and they love doing that. And that's an easy way to fix it. Like, let's say you only have like 10% Tanner Houck and you're playing 10 teams today. Well, let's say everything looks good, but you don't like one pitcher, but you love your stacks and you couldn't get the mixes right. We'll do that. And then you can always rerun after. There's tons of little things you can do, but there's nothing worse than just having dead players and just being absolutely screwed. There's no worse feeling. So make sure not to do that. Or even on Saber, you don't even have to upload it sometimes. Maybe like 30 minutes before, just download the CSV and then go back to the time that said that if anything goes haywire with the optimizer and you're safe. You at least have something in that's not complete crap. So it's a good point you brought up for sure.
Yeah, I make plenty of mistakes playing DFS. Always have, always will. But having a bunch of dead players in your lineup in this day and age, in my opinion, you're just being a little bit lazy and not uploading reasonable CSVs and then editing from there.
It can be the difference between a winning and losing season, honestly, over the course of a year if you play pretty heavy volume. And it can be the course of like even just like maybe more breaking even than like just getting absolutely crushed, right? Like it could be a big difference, especially if it happens like once or twice a month for sure. Like, trust me, like I've had spots where I've like I remember I played F1 once and I was at my buddy's house and it was like 2 minutes before lock and I was like, oh shit, I have to make this manually on my phone and this is an error on me. And I just blew $150 because
listen, man, we play a lot of DFS. We're uploading in the last 5 minutes of slates, I don't know, 1,000 CSVs in the last 5 minutes when you take account all sports. And some of those times you're going to, miss click on a copy paste or the site's going to screw up or your internet's going to be down. So like I said, try to get an edge anywhere you can. And sometimes that edge is reducing the bad edge, right?
Correct.
Reducing your disaster days into, just losing days instead of just losing everything. Anyway, Dodgers and San Francisco are the last game on the slate. Logan Webb and Ryan Yarbrough pitching. Yarbrough, he's kind of like a long reliever type. 1 to 2 innings, I would expect, based on his recent workload. It is still the Dodgers that are favorites, sitting around minus 145. Logan Webb has been pretty pedestrian this year. I don't think I'm stacking the Dodgers. No interest in Webb. No interest in Yarbrough. We spent a lot of time talking about game theory, Saber Sim, optimizers. Maybe we had time because I don't have a lot to say about this game. What about you?
Yeah, I will say we talked a lot about game theory stuff. I didn't even talk about the Cardinals. Just to give you my quick answer. Cardinals, I think they have value amongst their lineups. They make a lot of sense. Angels, you could argue if you wanted to play them, you'd play them with double stud pitchers, but I don't think we have that Chris Sale type pitcher to really do that today, so I don't need to. And then Griffin Canning, I hate that he's a little chalky today. I know Steve talked about he liked him. Listen, I hate Griffin Canning. I have a bias there. I don't want to give you an opinion on a bias that I have. And I really have a bias against the Cardinals, but I do think they just have value amongst their lineup, so I don't hate them. But yeah, let's talk about this last game because I do think it's an intriguing one. You could easily look at this game and just say, hey, I could cut this down to a 6-game slate, but you could also kind of kick yourself at the end of the night and be like, why didn't I consider the Dodgers, right? They're the Dodgers for sure. And I honestly think you can make this argument with Logan Webb too. We know the Dodgers can just absolutely disappear at times as well. I don't think Logan Webb is crazy. I like John Gray, Houck, and a lot of these other pitchers we discussed way more. But if you got 5% of Logan Webb, I wouldn't X him out. I just really wouldn't, just because I know the caliber pitcher that he is. And I just don't think you're going to get Dodgers today, and they're going to be low owned. And you know how I talked about flipping the build today a little bit, DC, with spending up for the Rangers and Houston? What if it is the Dodgers? I mean, what if they are the offense that gets the job done? We talked about when you can get a low owned offense, that's just an absolute juggernaut. We have to consider it. And I think we have to consider the Dodgers, especially I want to flip the build a bit today. I know it's not the best ballpark being in San Francisco, but the way this Dodgers team hits the ball, I'm not going to ignore them. They're another team that I want to try to get overweight on, and it won't take much for me to get overweight on.
It won't take much. I don't think anybody's playing the Dodgers tonight. I won't be on any of my main lineups, but I totally get it with the Dodgers.
DC, I'm getting 0 in my runs right now, and there might be a reason for it. When we get off the show, I'm going to rerun stuff and see how much do I have to do to get them, because sometimes you do too much, right? It's sometimes when you play NBA, there's a guy you project 5 points up and you're like, I'm not getting any of them. This sucks. And maybe I realize I'm not getting much, but if I barely move the projection up and the Dodgers pop, I need to be thinking a little bit more about it. So that's something I want to double check. And I recommend you guys look at when you get off when we get off the show, or when we're finishing up this show. If anyone's running an optimizer right now, let me know if you're getting Dodgers, because I just don't think anyone is getting them. And that means they're not going to be owned. And to get the Dodgers unowned is just, not saying it's a gift, but if you could get the Dodgers below 10%, and I told you every slate they're going to be below 10%, wouldn't you want to be overweight every single slate?
Yeah, I mean, most slates are not, but yeah, no, I totally get it with the Dodgers there. I think they're a decent play against Webb. Not a pitcher I typically like to stack against, but the Dodgers can do some damage for sure. Let's get to the fun stuff at the end here. Favorite stack, favorite contrarian stack. Give you a minute to think about it. Mangone, I will go first. Favorite stack is the Braves. I do think this team is on the verge of figuring it out. I do think the Braves going to do some damage tonight. Favorite contrarian stack is going to be with the Angels against fat Lance Lynn. Gives up a ton of home runs. I know this Angels lineup, not the greatest in the world, but I do think they can do some damage against Lance Lynn. So, yeah, that's my two stacks, your favorite and contrarian stack, Mango.
Okay, so for me, I know for sure, top stack, it's either Houston or Texas. Like, I love those two offenses. They're definitely my 1 and 2 for sure.
Just give us the double Texas. You can put them in whatever order you want.
Yeah, I'd say I'm gonna probably go Astros 1 and then Rangers 2. But that's not gonna be my contrarian stack. I'd say, what would be my contrarian stack on this slate? Man, it's how about finish up and I'll give you a contrarian one, just because I need to do one more run to see which one I would like the most. Because it might be the Yankees, but I just want to double check. It's either the Yankees or Dodgers, but I want to check one last thing.
All right, Mango needs to click a computer button to find out what his favorite stack is of the night. So we'll give him.
No, I got it, DC. Let's go with Oakland, because we talked about them a lot, and I just think the leverage is really good, and that still allows you to spend up on those really good pitchers as well. And that segues into my favorite pitcher of the night, and I don't want you to steal it, so I'm going to jump back in. It's Tanner Houck. He's going to be my guy that is going to be super important to me. So I can do like a Tanner Houck and like a Charlie Morton type of build with Oakland. And then you know what that might even allow me to do too? Might even allow me to get like a Yordan Alvarez as like a one-off, or an Ohtani or something like that. So I love that Oakland stack. That'll be my contrarian one.
They were my second pick on the contrarian stack. So yeah, I like it. My most important pitcher, you listed Houck. I will have exposure to him, but I'll give a cheap version, Griffin Canning, who will get some ownership today, which is a little bit scary, but I do love this matchup for him. I don't think he's quite as bad as his overall stats have shown so far. And yeah, it's mostly honestly the price at 5,500 and the matchup against the Cardinals that has me interested. So Griffin Canning, probably going to be my most important pitcher of the day. Let's get a home run call, Mango, and you got a home run call for the people.
Yeah, home run call. I always got to make sure I don't do the home run call as the top overall play on the slate. So
yeah, they're very closely correlated, but we do two separate.
Yeah, I sometimes I say it in the wrong order, so I just want to make sure. Let's go with home run call. Let's go with Alex Bregman. I mean, the dude's on an absolute heater right now, so we'll say he rips one off of Mr. Aaron Brooks.
I've been on the Josh Naylor train. People have ridden that train with me for most of the year have benefited. I'll be back on tonight. I do like John Gray as a pitcher. I don't like his stuff against Naylor in particular. A lot of pitches over the middle of the strike zone. I think Naylor takes John Gray deep tonight. Bad Texas bullpen behind him as well. All right, man, going overall favorite hitter on this slate. Then we'll get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow, of course.
Yeah, top overall one. So one thing I always like to look at, which I think is super important in DFS, is sometimes there's just a clear option to spend on, and then there's like sometimes people will just be like, well, the position sucks besides this guy, and then I want to punt the position. For me, that's Corey Seager. Like, he's either on the winner or it's going to be a full punt, and I'm going to take my chances that it's Corey Seager is just on the winning lineup. I love the spot against someone like Carrasco, who lefty against a bad righty that can walk guys and be out of control. And also, if he hangs one off the plate, Corey Seager is not missing. So we'll go with Corey Seager as my play of the day.
Love it with Corey Seager. I would go with Mr. Matt Olson, who has had a very slow start to the year. I don't know. It's this is a weird thing to admit. Maybe I shouldn't, but the Braves announcers, who are very in tune with the team, seem to have thought over the last 2 or 3 games that Matt Olson has finally kind of figured it out this season. Hit a home run yesterday, long bomb, and I kind of trust them where they're at with Matt Olson.
Did they give a reason why, DC? Sometimes I like when they give a reason why. Sometimes maybe they caught something.
They give a lot of reasons why. I mean, they're talking to this guy every day, and
yes,
like, I don't like to dismiss that thing offhand, right? Of course, the numbers are what we're mostly basing it off of, but when 2 announcers that I trust that I know are in the clubhouse every day, and they're like, yeah, Matt Olson has talked to us, he feels good, and then he hits a home run, while they're talking about that. Yeah. I'll jump on that train for
there's little things these guys know, DC, that they might not disclose. Like, for instance, remember Andrew Wiggins? He went through that disaster situation. Like, everyone was like, he's dealing with some personal stuff we don't know. And it was some real personal shit. You don't know if Matt Olson maybe had some personal stuff going on at the start of the year that maybe messed with his head, or maybe he was going through a swing change. It's just little things that these guys don't like to disclose, the personal information, but they'll just kind of say, hey, good time to get on him, or good time to get off.
You don't want to buy into that blindly. But when it's a player who the talent is there, they've been underperforming, and then the announcing crew gets it right and they hit a 450-foot bomb, yeah, that's a player I want to buy in on. So Matt Olson for me. That'll do it for this show, though. Fun Wednesday afternoon show. I think a weird Thursday slate where we do have, I think, 4 or 5 late games. So we should have a show for you guys here tomorrow, same time, same place. Big weekend here coming up at Ron Pierce Sports. PGA Championship. We've got all the best golf picks that you need for that. UFC coming up this weekend. NBA playoffs, MLB, NASCAR, everything you need for DFS success. Go over to Ron Pierce Sports. You can use promo code DC15 for 15% off your first weekly or monthly payment. That'll do it for us. So we'll see you tomorrow for Mangone. I'm Draft Sheet. We're out of here.